So this is my second video on this channel and already I'm getting controversial. This should be good. Hi, I'm Anna Uden. I'm an author of this book, The Curse in Their Veins, and I'm also a doctor of clinical psychology. And today I'm going to be discussing an unpopular opinion that I have about content warnings inspired by a TikTok I saw criticizing this book, The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic. So before I go into what my actual stance is on content warnings in books, I have to give you a little bit of background on this book that I'm talking about. So my book came out a few days, I can't remember if it was before or after The Unfortunate Side Effects of Heartbreak and Magic by Brienne Randall. I found out within like a few weeks of publishing my book, and as I started to learn more and more about her book, I realized there were actually a ton of similarities between our books. Both of them were about family curses, witchcraft, had important grandmother characters, were about siblings as well. I think those are the main similarities that I noticed right off the bat. So as you can imagine, I bought the book for myself to see what I thought of it. It's been marketed very strongly on TikTok as Practical Magic meets Gilmore Girls, and I thought the marketing about that was pretty smart, so I read it. I actually read it on the way to my honeymoon, and you guys, I didn't like it. I'm just gonna say it. I didn't like the book for reasons that I'll go into in a minute. And I didn't say anything because, it's a debut author just like me. We seem to have some similarities. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I wasn't trying to rag on her. Now, a few weeks pass, and eventually I come across this TikTok.
All right, y'all know me. I don't usually do negative reviews. I just don't. And it's not because I don't believe in them or support them. I repost them all the time. I hype everyone up in the comments when they do them. I love them. I live for them, to be quite honest with you. I just don't have the guts to post them on my own page. But for this book, I will make an exception because I believe it should have come with so many more content warnings as a cozy read, and it didn't. And I've been sitting on it for a week, so we're going to talk about it because I'm a little flustered. Who was this for? Who was this for? I just want to make sure people go into this knowing what they're going into, because I was completely blindsided by quite a few things in this story, and it can be really harmful. Also, I don't care about spoiling this for you, okay? So if you don't want spoilers, this is not your video, and if you don't like negative reviews, this is also not your video. Okay, so first of all, this book has been pitched over and over as Practical Magic meets Gilmore Girls. Now, are there some similarities? Yes, Nicole Kidman's character in Practical Magic dates that are false for that really dark and demon guy. That whole kind of plot is in there. Gilmore Girls, yes, there's like a small town with all these characters that we get introduced to that has like so much diversity. And then like all the diverse characters we never see again. Like they're...
Okay, quick thing. So one thing that I've been seeing in terms of reviews for this book is often that it's not actually Practical Magic meets Gilmore Girls, or that it's more Practical Magic than Gilmore Girls. And honestly, I kind of disagree. I've only watched Gilmore Girls briefly because it is just not my thing. I find it to be very, very boring, to be quite honest with you. But I did really feel that it was the perfect blend between both of them. I very much got that small town feel of like, somebody who's baking, has these cozy friendships, kind of autumnal vibe in a sense. I definitely also got the Practical Magic references in terms of like two siblings, witchcraft, family curses, which, my own book has as well. So a lot of people are saying like, oh, it's not really so much Gilmore Girls. I actually disagree. To me, it felt very much Practical Magic meets Gilmore Girls.
They're in like the first two chapters, and they're like all really, really specifically described to make sure it's a diverse world we're existing in. And I was like, this feels a bit forced, but sure. And then we never see them. They don't come, like most of these characters, like, and if they do come back, it's like for a blip, like a sentence or two, but all the diverse characters, most of them, her best friend's still there, but most of them are gone. I don't necessarily think the marketing was...
How do I say this? I think in this day and age, as an author, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't write diverse characters, like for instance, Stephen King has gotten criticized for this quite a bit, then people are going to notice, and that makes sense because we live in a diverse world. It stands to reason that you're going to showcase a wide range of perspectives in your fiction, especially once you write book after book after book. So generally, I think it's a good thing to have diverse characters. And in some cases, I also think it's forced. For instance, my book takes place in Romania, where there is hardly any diversity in terms of racial distribution aside from Romanians and Roma people. This was something that I worried about. The people would be like, oh, like there's not enough diversity. It takes place in Romania, where there isn't a whole lot of diversity. It would be insane if I tried to force that by throwing in people in a really inauthentic way. So I don't think that we should be like forcing people to show diversity, especially because a lot of authors, if they can only really speak from their perspective, they're not going to do justice to other perspectives. You know, like I, as a woman, really struggle to write male protagonists. I really struggle to put myself in the head of a man and to think how they would think and to realistically write that. That doesn't make me a bad person. That just means I have my perspective, and I need to honor that I'm not going to do somebody else's perspective as well as somebody who better relates to that person. You're damned if you don't include diverse characters, and you're damned if you do, and then you don't bring them up again because they're like backup characters. I wish instead of telling people you need to write a quota of this specific diverse distribution of characters, we would just empower more authors of different backgrounds to write what is authentic to them.
Wrong, but I do think this is not what I signed up for. This book needed some content warnings. The dominant theme of this book is suicide. That's a huge...
I kind of disagree. I don't think it's the dominant theme at all. I think the dominant theme is choosing between love and witchcraft.
To the point where one of the main characters attempts it. In order to save the magic or to save certain people in this world, there has to be some kind of sacrifice. And so there's this inner battle for a couple of the characters throughout the whole story of like, well, who's gonna do it? What should I do? Should I take myself out? I just feel like there should have been content warnings. I feel like we've got to be responsible, man, especially if we're pitching this book as a cozy fantasy or cozy adjacent even story. We've got to have some trigger warnings here, because that is a big one for a lot of people.
So here is my stance on content warnings in books. I am not against content warnings in books. Actually, I have one in my book. Let me read you exactly what it says. It says, please take note that the following book contains potentially sensitive content that may not be suitable for some readers, including depictions of emotional abuse and indirect discussions of physical abuse. If you require support resources, the following are some options, and then I put a bunch of hotlines and resources. So I am by no means against them. I think it's good to try to be sensitive towards people who are struggling with their mental health or other such things. If you can, why not? Great. With that being said, I'm also against shaming people for not having content warnings. And I'm also against making our own personal triggers everyone else's responsibility but ours. Do you guys remember when Demi Lovato went to like this ice cream shop or frozen yogurt shop and got mad because there were like healthy alternative options for snacks there, and everyone was trying to basically tell her through the internet, hey, you were responsible for your own triggers, this person didn't do anything wrong. And this isn't something that I've actually ever spoken about on my channel before, my primary channel, Psychology with Dr. Anna. But, you know, why not let the cat out of the bag? It got to at some point. I actually had an eating disorder for 10 years, and during that time, there were a lot of things that triggered me. Comments from family members, other people going on diets, other people being thin, and I had to learn through the recovery process to deal with those triggers and to understand that they're not going away. Even if I try to tell people, hey, please don't say this, hey, please don't diet around me, hey, please don't show images of emaciated models in front of me, it's not going to go away. People are not going to respect what you want all the time, and triggers are going to come up inevitably. So a huge component of recovery is learning to deal with those triggers as they come up instead of trying to control and minimize them. Now, with something like suicide that this content creator is talking about, I do think that is particularly important to be sensitive of, because obviously the consequence of someone not being able to handle a trigger like that can be very devastating, catastrophic. So again, I'm not against the idea of giving this book a content warning. I think that's a fine idea. I just think that we need to balance that with taking responsibility for ourselves and not blaming the whole world for the fact that we feel emotionally reactive to things. You know, like one of the comments that I saw on this TikTok was a person saying, and it also contained cancer in this novel, and there needed to be a content warning for that. And I just thought, there is no way to minimize reminders of cancer in day to day life. And I don't think that it's completely healthy to try to remove these triggers. Where do we cross the line? What can we talk about? Does this mean that we can't discuss heavy topics in fiction anymore without a content warning? Because I gotta tell you, a lot of people don't read the content warning, and it's not going to deter them even if they do. Sometimes people unconsciously want to be triggered even if they consciously don't.
But no one's mentioning, and okay, now this might make you want to read it, and that's totally fine. I have dealt with some religious trauma. So when books have a lot of Christianese in them or Christian themes, like sometimes I'm okay with that because I was raised in the South and I can respect it. But in this book, I'm activated, just activated. These witches go to church. They're going to like a Baptist church. And like phrases like taking your thoughts captive, which was like, ooh, Bible verses were used as like direct lines of advice or wisdom. Things like that were peppered throughout the story, mostly in
Again, I just don't think this is valid criticism. Are we meant to put a content warning for mentions of Christianity? Because that's not okay. People are allowed to express their religious and spiritual beliefs and practices without worrying about triggering others. Unless you're going about it in a hateful, bigoted way, you have a right to show characters going to church expressing Bible verses that are important to them. Why are we pathologizing this? Like, I also was raised in a Christian household and decided to move away from that. I'm okay with people talking about their Christianity. Like, that doesn't trigger me because I understand other people have different perspectives. And I really don't understand this criticism of the book that it was heavily Christian because it was by and large about witches. Yeah, they occasionally went to church and maybe like 2 scenes and very occasionally mentioned Christian sayings. I don't consider that to be extreme at all. I don't consider it to be bigoted in any sense. And I think it's pretty dangerous that we're telling authors we can't let their own spiritual beliefs permeate through the novel. For instance, in my novel, you can absolutely tell that there are pagan influences permeating through it. I cannot imagine someone coming up to me and saying that this triggered them and that the existence of spiritual practices in my book triggered them. That feels so dangerous. And I also don't agree with this recent wave in BookTok of criticizing a book for its content and for its ideology rather than for the book itself. I think it's important for us to have a wide, diverse range of perspectives in fiction. And frankly, I think that this book had a lot of technical pitfalls that are better to focus on than just the fact that you don't agree with the person's ideology that wrote it. This is why I don't like Colleen Hoover books. It has nothing to do with the fact that she's displaying abusive patterns in her relationships. I think if you do that, you can do so in a way that's still empowering or at the very least interesting and gains insight into those dynamics. I don't have issue with Colleen Hoover's books because of their content. I have issue with her books because they're written extremely poorly.
That for me was incredibly jarring. And on the other side of that though, what was crazy is there's so much cursing. Like there's so many F words in the story. So like again, who is it for? Because it's not necessarily like a Christian book. It 1000% could have been, but because of some of the darker magical elements and like the cursing, who is it for? For me personally.
Books can be for a multifaceted audience. They can be for someone who is both Christian and witch, who's both Christian and curses, for someone who deals with suicidal ideation and wants to see that reflected in the characters, and also wants a cozy fantasy read. Just because it doesn't fit into one specific box or fits multiple boxes, I don't think that's necessarily something we can criticize a book for. Take my book for instance. My book starts out talking with these 2 sisters when they're children, and eventually we see them growing up, but it's by no means a children's book. And that's part of what I was worried about, was that people would read my book and think, is this a children's book or not? Because it has very adult themes, it has dark themes, it's not written as if it's for children. I wanted for people to be able to hold that nuance of this is an adult book that contains children for some of the chapters. So I feel like we could do a little bit better about honoring the complexities and the multifacetedness of human beings when we talk about fiction.
With some church pain and some church hurt, to see a lot of those phrases that really, again, activate some hurt and pain in me and like memories and things, like it wasn't a delight. It took me completely out of the story. Also, this is just a petty thing, but this book loves a simile. There's a simile on every other page of this story. I mean, girl's getting told by her grandmother that the grandmother's gonna die, and she is shuddering like a buttercup in a tornado.
Okay, I love this because this gets at what could have been technically improved about the book. And those are a lot of the qualms that I had with the book. So, the reasons that I disliked this book were I found the protagonist to be immature. And let me just preface this by saying I totally think that you can have immature, unlikable, disagreeable protagonists. But in this book, it kind of felt unself-aware in a way. Like the protagonist was mad that her brother and her ex left town, and she was like deeply wounded by this abandonment, which is basically just people differentiating and moving away from her. And there didn't seem to be a whole lot of character development in terms of her coming to terms with the fact that people moving away from you is not a hate crime. So stuff like that, I felt like character development was lacking and the protagonist never overcame their immaturity. I thought the book was riding off the coattails of Practical Magic and Gilmore Girls just a little bit too much for my liking. There was not enough that felt unique about it, in my opinion. I totally agree that the similes were very amateurish. I love a good simile, I love a good metaphor, but some of the pages, I literally remember I was on the flight to my honeymoon, I turned to my husband and I said, "This simile is so ridiculous, you have to hear it." I also thought there were too many characters. I got kind of confused with the names and, tracking everyone. I thought that, the main romance plot was not romantic because, spoiler alert by the way, the romantic lead, the romantic interest was in a relationship the whole time and engaged. And so I don't find that romantic at all. I don't think infidelity is something to romanticize. And I thought the dialogue tried too hard to be quirky, like Meg herself says. I thought that it was a lot of times just like too colloquial and like too much cursing and too many expressions that just felt a little bit forced and a little bit like I was in Gilmore Girls, which again, it's nothing personal to this book. I just don't like Gilmore Girls.
Kind of stuff where it's a lot of like something. It is very overwritten. It could have used some editing for sure. There's a lot of description. It is.
Completely disagree. One of the things that I love most in fiction is very rich description, and I completely understand that this is just a difference in preferences. A lot of people out there like things to be to the point. I very much like things to be floral and vivid and lush in terms of description, in terms of the five senses. So I think this is really subjective and not necessarily something to dunk on a book for. In fact, my next novel that I'm working on is going to be even more floral than my first one. And if that's not your cup of tea, then that's not your cup of tea. But I don't think it necessarily makes a book bad.
Long. It could have been half as long if you would just taken out a lot of just kind of the florally, flowery, and I love some flowery. Another silly thing that bugged me is that the tonality of all the language and dialogue within the characters sounds so Southern. And I'm in the South, I'm in Tennessee. I know Southern, and all of the language was Southern, but apparently it's a city set in California. So that felt, I was like, again, where are we? What are we? Because it was so Southern. It's such a Southern story. So why not put it, that was weird. And the main characters.
That's true. I was sometimes wondering, like, wait, where does this take place again? Because California didn't make sense. There was like an autumnal gust of wind that blew by. She like wrapped the sweater around her and I was like, where are we again? And honestly, I suspect this might have to do with editors and publishers changing details about books. Because I know that, for instance, they wanted to completely rewrite the title of this book from something that it was originally. And so I don't think it's unheard of for editors and publishers to be like, hey, can you make this from the South to California to make it more palatable or whatever the reason. And unfortunately, I think if that's the case, it just comes down to people making calls about books that they shouldn't make, that are superficial, that they just think are going to sell well, and that then sound very ingenuine.
Steals the love interest dog. Like the whole book. Like she steals the dog. For some reason that bugged me too. Ooh. I just went into this expecting a witchy, cozy fantasy, small town, good time vibes with lots of baking, which it had. It had that. And I really did enjoy the grandmother and main character relationship a lot. When the grandmother did pass, I cried. I got very emotional. My grandmother was very dear to me. I think this writer wrote grief beautifully. I do. I felt like that was very well done. I just think we need to be more responsible when it comes to if we're pitching something as a cozy read and there's something as triggering as ideation. I think for a good piece of the book. I really feel like that should be clarified in the content warnings, clarified on marketing videos, clarified within the influencer community when you're reading it. Like, please be kind. Listen, not every book is for everybody, and that is okay. And this one wasn't for me, and that is okay. You might absolutely love it. This might have been your favorite book of the year, and I'm so happy for you if it is, because my favorite book of the year, you might have absolutely hated. So please don't get in my comments and rip me apart, because I'm trying to be brave and do my...
To speak to that a little bit, I did notice that the author got a few comments hating on her after this video, a few comments saying, why didn't you put a content warning? You should have put a content warning. So, you know, like, people have a right to talk about negative impressions, give negative reviews of books. And also, let's be for real that, like, the author is going to get some hate because of it. So in summary, yes, I think generally if you are dealing with a sensitive subject like suicide or IPV, generally a good idea to include a content warning. And if you are a reader or just a human being on this world, please don't expect the world to remove triggers for you, because that is not ever going to happen, even if you ask it to. If you ask people, hey, could you remove this trigger about this thing I'm sensitive towards? Not everyone's going to respect that. A huge component of healing and recovery and whatever sort of problem you're going through is being able to understand what are the things I can control and what are the things I can't control, and relinquishing control over the things that you can't actually control. And can we please start reviewing books based on whether they were good and meaningful books rather than just the ideological content of them? Can we please go back to talking about the technical aspects of books rather than just, did I find this character likable, or do I agree with the ideology of the person writing it? Just some food for thought. Definitely let me know what you think about this topic. Do you think content warnings should exist? Do you think not? Have you read this book? And if so, what did you think about it? And I'll see you soon.